Now, let me say, you can make rules legally binding. There are mechanisms by which the weakest partner has the veto. I mean, there are mechanisms by which there has to be agreement by the most vulnerable party. But we have to agree that we want to do that. Now, I share the skepticism about the vested interests. And actually, I'll have to tell you that I don't think America has a chance of leading the world in the sustainability progress. But I think that there are countries in Europe, and by the way, Canada, that does. Canada is very interesting. They had such stringent banking regulations that they did not have a derivative problem. They don't have an army, and their standard of living continues to go up. And if you know the Canadians, we're not talking about the Scandinavians, we're talking about the Canadians, which the Americans say look like the same people, talk the same way. They actually, Canada is a working system. In other ways, Scandinavia is a working system. I think the answer to moving the world towards sustainability is to have individual countries doing things which will embarrass others. For example, every country, all the energy exporting countries and China have sovereign wealth funds. This is the money they get from the balance of payments advantages. Only Norway uses its sovereign wealth funds to promote sustainable development. Well, that ought to be an embarrassment to countries that build dams in places where they shouldn't be building them and cannot get a World Bank loan. So, you know, you embarrass and you shame people through transparency, and you have to basically do that. Law is incredibly important. Now, finally, let's come back to where the conference began. Universities have a crucial role. My university will take any amount of money from the oil and gas industry. We've just received $25 million from the oil industry to work on those issues. We have the Koch brothers in the United States, who are sponsoring the Tea Party, gave $150 million to create a cancer center at MIT. And do they believe that chemicals cause cancer? Of course not. They're going to be dealing with mechanisms. If we don't stand up and we don't start to fight the way MIT faculty fought against nuclear armament during the days when MIT split off those laboratories, we don't have a hope. The university is the most important change agent that exists. We have to encourage dissent. We have to protect tenure. We have to encourage students and criticize them when they just take and swallow wholesale the crap that most of my fellow colleagues deliver.
What I'd like to mention is that the problem of our current form of democracy, the representative democracy, is that it focuses mainly on short-term gains instead of long-term responsibility. And this is a very important issue. Therefore, the role of the citizens is very important. The only hope for promoting sustainability, both at national and international level, is the well-aware citizens. And therefore, there is the role of the law. Law, as already mentioned, should develop legal instruments such as the Aarhus Convention that give wide access to environmental information and participation. And then comes the third issue, that is the implementation. Okay, we have the Aarhus Convention in place, but we don't implement this properly. Unfortunately, our country has not sent a report to the Secretary of the Convention to inform the Secretary of the Convention about the level of its implementation. And about your idea of a right to an environment. I think that such rights are not very effective in terms of protecting the environment. We should not forget that we have already a right to a healthy environment in our Constitution. I think the major issue is that to create clear-cut rules and standards and enforce mechanisms and cores to ensure their implementation. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I had meant to cover some of the points that John made with regard to my talk, but I tried to keep as close as I could. to the time limits. But the reason for the analogy to Cicero with regard to one law in Athens and one law in Greece, under the European Convention of Human Rights, at least as interpreted by the House of Lords, and I'm thinking of, who are now the Supreme Court, by Lord Hockman and Lady Hale, that the European Convention requires the right answer in cases, but the margin of appreciation suggests that the right answer in any specific case might be more appropriately given in the locally. So, for example, headscarves can be outlawed because they claim it interferes with secularism in Turkey, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm saying that's no law. And particularly with the burqa issue and the Holocaust denial, it's using vague law to allow judges to decide or to rubber stamp what political authorities want, and I don't find that very palatable. Obviously, the United States is different because we have different conception of freedom of expression. That's all. You know, let's leave it at that. Second point, I like what Rawls has said in many ways, but I don't think you can get to where people want to get with Rawlsian theory, relying on Rawls. Because Rawls takes the uses the difference principle to explain how persons who are mutually disinterested and self-interested would create a society, and using his Maximin principle, are trying to protect themselves from being in the least advantaged category, which makes it very difficult to, A, put in intra-generational goods in that sort of system, and makes it also very difficult to put in environmental rights, because that requires that a person already have communal instincts. And I'm not saying that people shouldn't, but you know, there's a limit to how you can get there. And the third point I want to make with regard to Canada and what have you, Canada has one tremendous advantage. They're next to the United States, and nobody's ever going to invade Canada, so they don't have to worry about national defense. The same with New Zealand. It knows that Australia is out there carrying the load, and also the United States. And Japan realizes that without the United States, they're in trouble with regard vis-a-vis China. And I mean, those are just self-evident facts as far as I'm concerned. And as more and more European countries cut back on defense spending, for better or for worse, the United States is going to have to pick up the burden, particularly with regard to freedom of navigation, et cetera. Well, okay, thank you.
Very much. And lastly, Linda.
Thank you very much. First, I want to comment upon how can law protect the weak. Well, I'll say that first, the Helsinki Declaration about persons who are the products of research, that's one example. Another example is protection of minors. And my normal area originally was family law. I could tell you something about that. I'll do that later on. And my point was exactly that the law should also encourage. So in that sense, I think we agree in that sense that I'm very optimistic about science. I mean, I've been a vice chancellor. And I think that what we're doing in that respect, we should be cautious not to ruin. So I think we don't disagree as much as it might sound from the beginning. About global bioethics, it's around the same. In UNESCO, we often hear that people want it. They want to have global bioethical standards to lean on. So I think that, that if we do it in the correct way, as I said, to have the cultural differences accepted and to interpret them differently in different cultures and to make research how they function, we should be quite well off. About what I've been saying, I think the important thing is that it's not an either or, it's a both and. Each and every one of us needs both awareness, and we need bioethics, we need biolaw and global governance. And I think that awareness is fine, and I think somehow we should have the narratives that was asked for several places. We have very good stories in this. If you had marketing people, and people who are very good at making things be realistic and be very present to you, if they tell what we are doing and what we are not doing, having people having no food, no water, no whatever it is, and what climate change will lead to having to need the 4 globes. I mean, if we can tell that in an enthusiastic and engaging way, I think we can involve the young ones. And I think I'm quite optimistic when it comes to the young ones, because they are very interested in all of these things, much more than our generation has been. And I think if 10, 20 years from now, we would say that we did nothing, I think it's just about slavery or apartheid or something, did we really just sit there, do nothing? So I think it's very important that we, each and every one of us, take on responsibility individually, as Ines pointed out, as part of a university, as you pointed out, as part of government and nations, the way we can influence them, and accepting that we are all part of a global society these days, and we should take on that responsibility, because that's what it's now. So I think that the common responsibility in all its aspects should be the final core here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, three sentences from me. First of all, I'm surprised that none of my colleagues took up what I thought was the very interesting idea of the global referendum. I think that certainly deserves to be remembered and to be considered hereafter. Secondly, for those who prefer talking to eating, we do have 2 more sessions this afternoon, and may I respectfully ask the organizers, would it be possible to resume at 1:15? Is that feasible? Because I think that would help those who are presiding over the sessions this afternoon. So John and I had a brief word about this earlier. If we could resume at 1:15, then either that gives more time for talking or even enables us to finish a tiny bit early. So shall we, does that work? So,
well, that will enable us to get started 1:30, because to say you agree,
yeah.
You're going to start at 8.
Yeah.
So there's 15 minutes left.
Okay, all right, 1:15 then. And thirdly and lastly, but most importantly, will you join me please in thanking our wonderful panel?